I believe everybody should be on a good methylated multivitamin, meaning don't worry about whether or not your body can break something down into the usable form. Feed it the usable form, right? So in other words, don't take folic acid, take methylfolate. Don't take cyanocobalamin, take methylcobalamin. So a good methylated multivitamin would fill in those gaps and give your body the raw material that it needs to do its job. In the absence of going out and actually getting a genetic test done, which I think everybody should do once in their lifetime because your genes never change, then you can begin to supplement for deficiency instead of just the sake of supplementing. Right? There's lots of incredibly good supplements out there, ashwagandha and CoQ10 and St. John's wort and all kinds of, vitamin C. I can make an argument for vitamin C. You can make an argument for all of these different supplements, but the question is, does your body need them? And how do you know? You have to know what your body can process and what it can't. And as soon as you know that piece of information, now you supplement for deficiency and watch the magic happen. And this will affect, this process of methylation, Tom, is almost like the hub of a wheel with a whole bunch of spokes, right? So people with anxiety usually have three other conditions that they don't link to their anxiety, right? They have poor sleep, right? They have a hard time falling asleep because their mind keeps them awake, or they fall asleep and they wake up at night and they have a hard time going back to sleep.
Me.
Because their mind wakes them up. Almost every person that suffers from rampant anxiety also has gut issues. And why does someone with anxiety have intermittent gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, irritability, and cramping? Because they don't actually have those conditions pathologically. They have them because the same gene and the same deficiency, methylfolate, that causes poor catecholamine regulation also causes poor intestinal motility. So they chase allergies all of their life. They're like, well, I went and got an allergy test done. I'm allergic to wheat, soy, corn, dairy, blueberries, bananas. I'm allergic to all this stuff. So I cut it all out of my diet. I'm like, okay, how's it going for you? I still get cramping. I still get bloating. I still get gas. I still get constipation. Okay, because it's not the contents of the gut. It is the pace of the gut. Remember, our intestinal tract is a 30-foot long conveyor belt. You put contents on it at one end, and as it exits the stomach, as it traverses the small intestine and eventually into the large intestine, the colon, and it exits the rectum, it goes from being very from being very acidic to being very alkaline. And the sequence of events is important. And just like any factory that's running on a conveyor belt system, if you walk in that factory and double the speed of the conveyor belt, or triple the speed of the conveyor belt, or even worse, reverse the speed of the conveyor belt, the entire assembly line would break down. But there's nothing wrong with the conveyor belt, or the part that's on the conveyor belt, or the people that are working there. It's not it's very often it's not the gut bacteria or the contents of the gut. It's the pace of the gut. So by missing these simple nutrients, you get the expression of all of these conditions, right? If I was able to magically go into your body and just deplete methylfolate or deplete the complex of B vitamins, I promise you your anxiety would come back like the tide. And when your anxiety came back, so would your sleep interruption and your gut issues. You would have a skyrocketing incidence of gas, bloating, constipation, irritability, cramping, and you may or may not relate it to that deficiency, but it is. When I was in the the mortality space, I was reading medical records for a living for 20 years, and I read thousands and thousands and thousands of medical records, and I was pour through these medical records, and it was always astounding to me that you would see people with chronic conditions doing the same thing over and over and over and over again, and the chronic condition would never heal, right? So like people that would have chronic anemia, generally the treatment for that is, B12, folic acid, and iron. Well, 44% of the population can't process folic acid. So you're treating people that have anemia with folic acid, which they can't process. And so you keep feeding it to them, and the anemia never gets better. Some of those people would stumble upon methylfolate, the form that your body converts it into, and instantly the anemia would go away. Now, when the anemia goes away, the energy returns. When the energy returns, the sleep deepens. So you'd see this whole myriad of things get fixed just by putting the right raw material back into the human body. I mean, if I depleted vitamin D3 from your bloodstream, if I can magically go in and just deplete the sunshine vitamin, which I think is arguably the most important nutrient in the human body. It's the only vitamin, human beings make on our own. You start to deplete that, the first thing to fall is the immune system, right? Which is why D3 deficiency was the second leading cause of morbidity in COVID. It's also why vitamin D3 deficiency which is more prevalent in minorities, made people say, well, COVID disproportionately affects minorities. That's true. It had nothing to do with them being a minority. It had to do with the pigment of their skin. The darker the pigment of the skin, the lower the vitamin D3. The lower the vitamin D3, the more compromised the immune system. The more compromised the immune system, the more susceptible you are to all kinds of viruses and pathogens, not the least of which is COVID. So this was an issue with a nutrient deficiency, D3, not an issue with a massive autoimmune, massive amount of immunocompromised people. This was an issue with a massive amount of nutrient deficiencies. And if you trace the nutrient deficiency in a human being and you find it and you put that raw material back into their body, they thrive in ways they just never could have imagined.
And how broad of a spectrum is the missing elements? So if I were to go and take a DNA test, am I going to fall into one of 5 categories or one of 500 categories?
One of about 5 categories, because we're human beings. We're all very, very similar, right? So these 5 genes are in every human, right? And they're the 5 methylated genes. And there are other genes that you could look into. I mean, like I said, you can really go down the rabbit hole of genetic testing, but what you want to find out is what basic raw materials that my body needs to perform the majority of its functions am I deficient in, right? The majority of us are deficient in vitamin D3. We're deficient in methylfolate, not folic acid. Folic acid, we've been led to believe, is a vitamin. It's not vitamin B9. Folic acid is an entirely man-made chemical. We make folic acid in a laboratory. You cannot find folic acid anywhere on the surface of the earth. It does not occur naturally in nature. And you'll never convince me that something that we synthetically make in a laboratory is somehow necessary for optimal health.
It's interesting. That's how I feel about supplementation in general. So anybody that's been following me for a while knows I don't do supplements. I will
because you have a good diet.
Yes, but that's not why I don't do supplements. The reason I don't do supplements is so often you hear, oh my God, this thing is like super critical. You've got to have it. Oh, sorry, by the way, it kills you. And the number of times, I'm at an age now where the number of times something started out as a miracle cure only to find out it causes cancer or whatever. Right. And so now I'm just super paranoid. Now, having said that, in full disclosure, because in the research, I heard you say that thing about methylated multivitamin. I literally bought one right away. I'm like, let me just try, because I don't have a philosophical problem with it. I just worry about isolating compounds. When you isolate a compound, who knows? Like, nature expects you to get things in a certain way. Right. So like, I'm always a little, I do it. I want to be very honest, but it makes my radar every time I separate a yolk from an egg white. I'm like, nature doesn't expect me to separate these two things. And so is there some problem that you can generate? Anyway, so I'm a little paranoid about isolating compounds. So I guess in that sense, I'm very on board with being super skeptical of folic acid. But I'm
cyanocobalamin, that's the other one.
I'm also skeptical though of like metformin, all the rage. The number of people I've talked to, even off camera, who are like, bro, I was willing to say on camera, this is important. Even off camera, I'm telling you right now, like, I'm into this thing. And I just cannot bring myself to do it.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of metformin. Metformin has all kinds of secondary consequences. I mean, it's a good glucophage, but you can get, you know, if you look at side-by-side clinical studies, that berberine, which is a root, performs better than metformin at not only just hemoglobin A1C, lowering hemoglobin A1C, which is the 3-month average of your blood sugar, but also controlling insulin levels. And there are virtually no side effects to berberine, right? Now, there's a trade-off to glucophages like metformin and some of these other ones, Ozempic, tirzepatide, GLP-1.
Really fast, just because it's a fancy word, and I'm married to a Greek woman. So phage means to eat, basically. So glucose eater is what they named
glucophage.
That. Nice.
But, if you're morbidly obese and a type 2 diabetic, metformin could save your life. Right, like insulin can save your life. But the thing is, do you want to have a dependency on those things long term? And I would agree with you. The answer is no. I'm a huge fan of basic supplementation. If you're not getting enough vitamin D3, you should not be.
It's the one supplement I will take during the winter.
Okay.
Yeah, I hear you on that. So, so methylated multivitamin. What happens if I overdo it? What happens if I don't need it and I take it?
That's a good question. So number one, that's one of the reasons why you get a genetic test, because you can see if your body can methylate it or not. So if you know that if you don't have the gene that codes for the conversion of folate into methylfolate, for example, you can very safely supplement with methylfolate. But let's say that you over supplement. the difference between oversupplementation with water-soluble vitamins and over-supplementing with fat-soluble vitamins is night and day. So A, D, E, and K are fat-soluble vitamins. You want to take those with food. If you are supplementing with them, you also want to be cautious about how high the levels get. If you look at most blood tests, there's even a range for vitamin D3. I think it goes
A, E, D, and K?
A, D, E, and K. I still remember from grad school, put your vitamins in the attic. A-D-E-K.
Nice.
And I still remember that analogy. So I sound really smart, but I just remember that from school. But so A, D, E, and K, those are fat soluble, so those actually can accumulate in tissues and what have you. But water soluble vitamins are meant sometimes to be in excess and sometimes to be in deficit, right? Because what if we, when we were foraging around, ate high amounts of grass-fed animals for a period of time, and then ate high amounts of berries and foliage for a period of time? Well, you can't just say, well, at one period of my diet, I'm toxic, and the other one, I'm deficient. No, what happens is the body actually gets rid of those very easily. You let them go in the urine, which is why if you look at natural ranges for things like B12, it goes all the way up to 1,240, depending on the lab, nanograms per deciliter. Vitamin D3 goes from 30 to 100. It's not more toxic at 90 than it is at 70. 60 to 80 is the target range. But so you can safely, with water-soluble vitamins, if you were taking a methylated multivitamin, for example, you could get away with, maybe I got a little bit too much B12 and a little bit too much of the B complex. Now, massively supplementing with them is totally different. But when you take most high quality methylated multivitamins, they're in a ratio that your body can get rid of, even if you met the nutrient requirement for your body across the entire spectrum. So there's very little risk with things like that, right? It's like D3. What if I got 30 minutes of sunlight one day and I got 2 hours of sunlight the next day without burning my skin? Am I at risk because I created more IUs of vitamin D3 in the prolonged sun exposure than I am when I had less sun exposure? No, you're not at risk. Your body's meant to survive and optimize in those ranges. You will know right away if you start taking a methylated multivitamin whether or not your anxiety, your anxiousness, and your gut issues are coming from a deficiency, because you will see those things near immediately take a backseat.